Neil Benson approached the gate of his house. Strange. Who could it be? Close friends and people he knew had called to let him know when they were coming up. But here, it was a good time to put up security cameras so he wouldn't have to run every time some travelers, whose navigator had gone crazy, came crashing through the gates. He opened the iron door with its ornamental overlays and recoiled. In front of him stood a broad-shouldered man with a deep scar across his face, running from his left temple to his right cheek. Through a ruffle of short gray hair, his tan scalp showed through. The surgeon, who had extensive years of experience, knew at once that it was a stabbing. "Are you the owner of this house?" Neil nodded thoroughly. "I'm from the ad. You need a maintenance man for the estate, don't you?" "Well, that's true." The man looked at the applicant. "It's just..." "What? You don't like the way I look?" He knew at once the petitioner understood. "Well, there's no need to argue about it." He looked down at his dust-covered sneakers, sighed, and started to turn around to walk the 3 more kilometers to the highway. "How smart you are," the owner thought to himself. "The last thing I need is bandits. You hire one, and then he'll attack you at night, rob you, and take your life for nothing." He wanted to say no, but something kept him away. "Wait a minute," the owner of the house said. "Actually, I make the decisions here, and I don't think I've answered anything yet. Are you even sure you're not mistaken? We need someone to take care of the house and the garden, take care of the flowers, maintain the lawns, keep an eye on the fruit trees, clean up the leaves in the fall. Again, the river is close by. There is a pier equipped, a hangar for pleasure boats and catamarans. They also need care. And in winter, there is so much snow that I have to clean the whole barchans. You don't have to do it with your hands or a shovel. A mini tractor with a dozer blade has been bought. Can you handle the machinery?" "Yes, I can do it. If you take me, I've done a lot more than that." Neil stopped talking. He walked around the man for some reason, thinking for a few minutes. Then he said, "All right, I'll take you, but there are a few conditions. First, you are on probation for 3 months, and if you make any mistakes, there will be no indulgence. Immediately say goodbye. Secondly, you will live in an outhouse next to the house. There is a telephone number, and if you need me, I will call you. Third, no strangers, and no alcohol." That was probably the most important thing I wanted to say. He nodded and offered his hand. "My name is Alexander." The Benson family, where the strange man was hired, was well known in medical community, not only within the boundaries of the city with 1 million inhabitants, but also far beyond its borders. The private clinic under the direction of Neil Benson Jr., named after his father, performed the most complex operations, bringing back to life the most hopeless patients. Understandably, this required a great deal of money, but what can compare in value to a human life? The chief physician, educated at a prestigious medical university, had been gaining important knowledge from a young age. How could this be? Very simply, my mother is the head of the department at the medical academy. My father is a chief specialist at a national-level hospital. Friends and acquaintances were also colleagues, so the first grader easily understood Latin, even had to be present at the most complex operations. "And if you want, Mrs. Ross?" The schoolboy looked at the biology teacher who had called him to the blackboard. "I'd rather tell you how to do a craniotomy. Yesterday, I watched my father operating on a poor motorcyclist." "Sit down, Neil. You don't have to." The teacher went pale and continued the lesson, stuttering a little. He had a wonderful life, a prosperous childhood, a secure adolescence, a prestigious high-paying job. The only problem that sometimes embarrassed Neil was that his parents were already old. His father and mother had spent their youth working, climbing the career ladder, seeking recognition. They had no time to have a child. By the time they had an heir, both had already passed the 40-year age mark, and now a man and a woman were urging their son to start a family. "Look, Neil, you need to get married right away. Father and I are not young. We'd like to see a grandchild." "Well, Mom, beautiful women do not stand in line outside my office." Son tried to make a joke. "And I do not want to ask the first woman I meet to get married." "But I didn't mean to ask the first woman. You know exactly what I mean. Dorothy is perfect for you. Her parents are old friends of ours, and they'll be very happy to know that you'll ask their daughter to marry you." Mom, let me decide who my life partner will be. At this rate, we won't even live to see the child we love get married. Dad, stop exaggerating. Neil raised his voice. Don't talk to your father like that. Immediately, his mother became angry. The man got up and left the house to freshen up. This kind of talk became more and more frequent, upsetting Neil Benson Jr. The man was irritated by his parents' obsession. Of course, Dorothy is a nice girl, but I don't like her at all. He shared his frustrations with the day laborer. How can I explain it to them? Despite his repulsive appearance, the new employee turned out to be an attentive interlocutor, and as it turned out, could give sensible worldly advice without posing his opinion. And you make a joke, Mr. Benson Jr. Say that you are not attracted by girls. Both laughed out loud. I'm afraid my mother would have a stroke after such a confession, replied the doctor, still smiling. No, we must think of something special, otherwise they will not leave me alone. He was silent, looking intently at his interlocutor. You know, Alexander, I often notice that your advice helps me a lot. You can see that the history of destiny is written in black lines on the gray pages of life. You've been cleaning recently. Stripped to the waist, a few scars on your body told me a lot as a surgeon. Those are overgrown bullet holes and shrapnel marks, are they? Yes. What they are is what they are. I'm not going to lie. I've been through a lot. The man sighed heavily and looked away. He moved the gardening tool from hand to hand, signaling that it was time for him to go. Heading toward the back of the property, the man involuntarily shuddered. He felt as if enemies lurked among the bushes and were about to attack. A deep breath. His gaze fell upon the garden path lined with patterned tiles. The ornament brought him back to reality. That's it. The fighting's over. There is nothing. There's nothing. And I'm a simple gardener, a handyman, and I have to do my job. I've got a roof. I've got a paycheck. I'd rather do it this way than in a back alley among the homeless. Alexander shook his head and went to work on the flower bed. Time passed. The young doctor became bonded to the new man. They discussed questions that Neil would be ashamed to ask his parents. After learning that the man loved sweets, he always brought him cakes or candy. The gardener rarely talked about himself, but even from those phrases, you could find out some facts about his life. We were returning from a military mission. We were on the way down from the mountains and were ambushed. The battle was fierce. Many of my guys were killed. I was hit by shrapnel from a grenade. I rolled down some hole, threw mud on myself so they didn't notice. Sighing heavily, Alexander relived those terrible moments. Then he crawled for many days to his own. Fortunately, I made it. The hospital patched me up. He fell silent, began to prune branches of an ornamental tree. What happened next? The scars look like they kept you a long time in the ward. That's right. When they let me out, they gave me a leave of absence. I came home, and there was the end of everything. My beloved wife had died. She was in her last month of pregnancy. Realtors took the apartment, forging documents. No money, no yard. I lived with relatives for a week, sat by my beloved's grave, made my last respects, and went back to his unit. What else was left? Yes, I feel sorry for you. Was it very hard on your soul? Yeah, that's true. And then I was a prisoner. I was like a dog on a chain for a few years. They let me down in a pit so I wouldn't run away. And in the daytime, they made me get out and do chores. One day, I was very lucky. Our convoy was going down the street. I cried out in a voice that was not my own. Boys, help me. The lad stopped right away, knocked the pads down without too many questions. And the bosses, that's too bad for them. You are a military man and have been in hot spots. You could have got yourself a place to live, a decent position, said Neil Benson Jr. I'll certainly look into the matter. Believe me, we will get justice. What's the point of it all? The interlocutor answered thoughtfully. Orders, medals, ceremonial tunic, a quiet life without fuss. Everything suits me fine. Sitting in the dining room, the young man spoke to his parents about the latest information. No, I do not understand how to treat yourself like that. A man has an opportunity to get his apartment back, to become different, and he is satisfied with his profession as a gardener. I don't get it. Apparently, my friend, you're not mature enough for that, grinned his father. And the fact that he's not a bandit, but an ex-military man, we were good to him before, and now we'll dust him off. People like that are worth their weight in gold. A couple of months after this conversation, Alexander came up to the owner of the house. Mr. Benson, I have a question. I listened to you attentively, my friend, he replied with surprise. Anything you want, within reasonable limits. I need an assistant. Neil looked at the employee perplexedly. All right, as you say, I'll put the job out for you. No, you got me wrong. Suddenly, Alexander laughed. I need a four-legged friend, a dog, a guard. And again, he met the puzzled look of the owner of the house. With your military background, I feel very safe. And then, you know my wife is allergic to fur. We don't even keep cats in our rooms. That's understandable. I'm just afraid of what might happen. The homestead is on the outskirts, in case bad people come by. You should still think about my suggestion. A week after the conversation, Neil Benson Jr. came home and called Alexander. Come with me. There's a matter that can't wait. After a couple of hours on the road, they stopped in front of a large manor house. They were already waiting for them. A large guard dog was barking in a wide enclosure. In front of the guests sat funny puppies. Central Asian Shepherd Dog. Alexander stretched out in delight. What a surprise! At his voice, one of the little dogs questioningly raised his head, thought a little, then slowly waddled toward the speaker. This one, I'll take it, whispered the retired Major General of the 82nd Airborne Division. Picked his own master. Is it all right that it's a girl? Asked the owner of the kennel. A lot of people want male dogs. That's even better. She'll take care of the house and garden just fine, the man said. Before the brave guard had settled into her new place, she began her duties at once. My God, Matilda is adorable, the woman said admiringly at the dinner table. I went out into the garden to get some fresh air. Suddenly, a curious crow flew into the path, sitting there, looking at me. So our manly guard rushes at the bird with an amused snarl, covering my chest from danger. I couldn't help myself, gave her some steamed meat and scratched her behind the ear. Mom, you're allergic, was all Neil Benson Jr. could utter. Oh my goodness, it's nothing. A couple of pills and everything was back to normal. But Matilda is wonderful. I'm in love with her forever. 6 months later, there was a solid-sized dog running around the property. It strictly controlled that no one dared to enter its territory. Visitors waited patiently for Alexander to come and escort them home. One day, the gardener stayed late at the property. Matilda ran off to the other side, chasing birds. Suddenly, there was a loud cracking sound. The man looked up and saw several people had climbed over the fence. You listen to me, you freak. Be quiet. You might get away with your life. The manner of speech of the uninvited guest immediately made it clear who these people were, and the overalls only confirmed their suspicions. The man in front of them was an escaped convict. We've been watching your farm for a couple of days. Down on your face. We'll give your owners a bit of a beating. Take some money, and goodbye, laughed the other man softly. Matilda, called Alexander, stepping sharply towards the bandits. He held a shovel in his hand. The criminals prepared for an attack. But at that moment, a huge snow-white lightning bolt flew out from around the corner. Without making a sound, the dog rushed into action without warning. A scramble ensued. In a minute, the attackers were on the ground, trying not to move their blood-bitten hands and feet. They begged for mercy. Alexander, what is wrong with you? Husband and wife began to examine the defender. Okay, penetrating stab wound on the abdomen. Neil, call an ambulance right away. Every second counts. Call your hospital. They'll get here quicker. And tell them to get the operating room ready. Matilda, quietly ordered Alexander, watch out. The dog, which had received military training, immediately took a place in the center of the massacre, warning with a muffled growl that the bandits better not move at all. The gardener suddenly felt his head blurry and fainted. He did not see the police arrive, followed by the ambulance. He didn't feel his way to the operating table.
Neil Benson, disaster. The man's blood type is the rarest. There's almost none left in our bank. What to do?
It was easy to see the horror in the eyes of the head nurse in the operating room. "Fourth," repeated the experienced surgeon. "Urgently call my son. Tell him to come immediately." "My God, what a coincidence. Neil and Alexander have the same blood type," pondered Neil Benson Sr. while waiting for the heir to arrive. When he arrived, the situation was explained to him. The young man readily agreed to become a donor. Unbeknownst to the others, Neil Benson took samples of both men and sent them for DNA testing after the operation. Alexander recovered quickly, which was no surprise, and the famous surgeon who received the DNA results a few days later closed himself in his office and cried like a baby, then invited his son into the patient's room. "It is very hard for me to do this, but I have to tell the truth." Confused, Neil Benson Sr. began to speak. "Neil, your real father is Alexander." In the silence of the grave, you could hear a barely noticeable speck of dust fall to the floor with the noise. "Don't interrupt, but listen carefully to what I have to say," the doctor began. "Your mother and I turned out to be excellent doctors, but poor reproductive specimens. My wife was infertile, and I did not want to divorce or cheat on her. So when a woman died in the maternity ward after giving birth to a baby, we did not hesitate for a second. Immediately, we prepared all the legal documents and made sure you never knew what had happened." "Wait a minute. So Carrie—" "Yes, your wife died after Neil was born. Most likely, the gruesome news of your supposed death played a key role. Command rushed to bury you early." Everyone present was afraid to utter a word. Neil quietly approached and took Alexander's hand, and Neil Benson Sr. understood that he had lost his adopted son forever. The first to break the silence was the former Major General. "If I may, let things remain as they are. There is no need for any changes, and outsiders don't need to know about our secrets, okay?" Neil Benson Sr. grabbed his other hand. "My dear man, as of this moment, you are a member of our family. I am immensely grateful to you. Stay with us. We won't let you go anywhere."
"Matilda, do you miss our Alexander?"
The lady of the house was carefully brushing the dog, wearing a special respirator.
Soon he will come, and you will be near him again."
At that time, there was the sound of the gate opening. The snow-white dog rushed to the car with a joyful howl. He galloped around Alexander, trying to lick his nose. "My friend, there you are," said Neil Benson, putting his hand on his shoulder. Come on. Now you will have a new life." An 82nd Airborne Division Major General took a job as a gardener in the home of a wealthy surgeon. Everyone laughed, and when the fugitive convicts broke into the house,